All right, so as an introduction, as Greta said, I'm Cognos Paul of Cognos Paul blog. Yeah. Hmm? Connection issues? All right. I'll talk and, spread things out a little bit until everyone gets connected. At the very, very worst, you can follow along. I will be doing all of the steps. And feel free to just interrupt me with questions. I'm easy. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sure. So as of Cognos 11, Cognos Analytics, the way that JavaScript works in the report has been changed dramatically. We still have the classic non-interactive mode where we can just drag an HTML item in and insert a script in there, hello world. But that does not work in Cognos Analytics. And when we do that, we unfortunately get a very, very cryptic and useless error message. Nowadays, we have to write a JavaScript file, JS file, save it onto the server, and call that using a JavaScript control from inside Report Studio. The benefit of doing it like this is that we have all of these new features. We can associate a query directly with the JavaScript control, something that we weren't able to do before. We would have to pull in a list and hide that and then parse through that list. Or we would have to drag in a repeater and stick HTML items in there. This way, the control is getting the data directly from Cognos in a JSON format. Now, if you follow the PM Square blog, you'll recognize this solution. It's an example. You may need it in your organization, you may not. But the idea is to show how we can use it and how we can edit it to meet our own needs. Before I start, I'll show you a couple of other examples of things we can do with JavaScript controls. The old expand and collapse, very popular. Something that you'll be seeing later on today, something that my colleagues have been working on called Datashark. And it's using a tabular plugin. Very nice, very easy, and is a little bit more advanced than anything that we currently have in Cognos. So, is everyone connected to the network? Taking a while?
I think we got about 3 total.
3 total. All right. Sure. So is it trouble with the Wi-Fi or is it Wi-Fi? It's always. Oh, that's annoying. Yeah. And unfortunately, I don't have any other Wi-Fis that.
So I just hotspotted my phone. There should be an open Wi-Fi. There should be an open wireless network called Bacon. See if that works.
Netflix okay?
What's that?
Watch a movie on Netflix? John Wick? I don't know. What do people like? So if you can't log into our LinkedIn Fastbit, my friend just opened Bacon. Okay. This one. So the JavaScript control that we have here is a way of validating 2 date prompts, a start date and an end date. This is to prevent users from selecting an invalid date range, such as a start date of January 1st, 2018 and an end date of January 1st, 2017. Doesn't make sense. So we can begin by going to team content / Bacon, JavaScript, and then the workshop. And we'll start with workshop start. 3 buttons. I think I found a bug with Cognos Analytics. Let's try this again. Or I found a bug with Arlington FastBet. Yeah, this is embarrassing. You know, I had ran through this about an hour ago. Everything was working great.
The internet connection here is just tough.
Yeah. All right. I hope you have unlimited. Just charge it back to PM Square.
Do you need a hotspot or do you have one?
I'm going to use my friends. Well, at the very, very, very worst, I'll use my local host. And I apologize to everyone that can't get connected to the internet. Fortunately, I wrote the workshop guide in such a way that anyone could do it. So at the very worst, you can do it later. To begin with, we have a prompt page that has 2 prompts on it, start date and end date. Path, the URL? Oh, it is bacon/JavaScript, workshop, and then we have workshop start. But I don't have internet connection anymore. Oh, maybe.
I set up a bacon too. If you want to try that.
Yeah, it's not connecting to that one. Bacon 2.
Yeah, Paul's right, bacon too.
Come on. Everyone loves bacon. It does not want to. Keeps on rejoining Arlington FastBet. Disconnect. Don't you just love technology? Okay. I will continue. A little bit embarrassed. All right, as I said, we have 2 prompt controls, and I already have the custom control that you can drag in from the toolbox under Advanced Custom Control. At the moment, in this version of Cognos, we still need to call the control directly. So in this case, /IBM Cognos /JavaScript, and then the control name. Hopefully that will change in the near future. The control is expecting a number of different parameters. From prompt to prompt, min date, max date, dynamic start date, dynamic end date. Yes?
How did you get here? Because I clicked on workshop start and it's running the report.
If you click on the 3 buttons, the 3 dots to the right, more, and then edit report. If you already have the report run, there's a pencil that you can click on to open the edit mode. Okay. So right now, in order for us to use it, we need to make sure that the prompts both have names. So let's call this one start date and end date. And in the custom control, we can reference the same names. Click OK, rerun it. And that did not work, failed to load. This is why we need to have things set up in advance, and we need to make sure that everything works. Okay, start date, end date, custom control. The parameter names that you see here, I'm sorry? Yeah. Okay, the parameters that you see here are written into the JavaScript itself. So it is expecting to get from prompt and to prompt. And we'll talk about the other parameters that I have listed there in a little bit. Oh, come on. It's because I don't have an internet connection, it can't get to Bootstrap. And because it can't get to Bootstrap, it's failing on that. Let's try one last time. Bacon 2, don't let me down. Otherwise, I'll just read this and we'll pretend that it's working. Last chance. Cognos 11, PM2, leave. Come on. It works. You rock.
Does it matter which is writing?
Training 1, training 2, training 3, they all have the same rights. Workshop start, 3 dots, and then edit report. If you run the report, you would probably get a JavaScript error because the control, it doesn't know what it's looking for. So again, prompt start date, end date, deja vu, custom control, start date, end date.
The navigation, I think, is hanging.
I'm sorry?
Can you slow down a little bit?
I'm sorry. I'm excited to get it to work. It's embarrassing to stand up here and have nothing work. Yeah. All right, so let's go back. So under welcome, yeah, Cognos Analytics, they changed all the way the navigation works.
Well, what's the report called?
The report that we want is workshop start.
Okay, so click search. In
Not here?
click there, type workshop start.
Ooh.
Oh, he just did.
Right, and
Yeah.
then you can click the buttons
Yeah.
and edit report.
Search here, I could have taken. And of course, we get the error.
Yeah. If you run it, you will get the error. So you do need to edit it. If you are already in the report, you can click on the pencil button, and that will take you into the edit mode. All right, so start date. We need to give the name of the prompt. Start date, we need to give the name of the end date. End date, and we have to reference those two in the configuration. The configuration is handwritten instructions to the JavaScript control. In this case, we're instructing it to look for 2 prompts with those names. When we run it, no errors. And we cannot select a start date later than the end date. And if we try to select an end date before, can't do it. Now, same thing happens if we try to manually change it. It's not going to work. I got so flustered, I forgot where I was.
So this JavaScript is running on, let's say, if I have a distributed environment, it's running on a dispatcher?
The JavaScript should be on the gateway. So what's happening is when you log into Cognos, you're logging into the gateway and it's running the reports somewhere else. But the actual, all of the browser thinks everything's coming from the gateway. So all the JavaScript files have to be in the gateway. If you have multiple gateways, each one will need to have this. Sure.
So, because you mentioned earlier that unlike before, where you pull the HTML,
Yeah.
HTML and then through JavaScript there, you're saying the JavaScript is on the gateway. The gateway serves that code there.
Correct. Every gateway needs to have this JS file somewhere on the server. It can be, you can have a third-party system that holds it. That's not a problem. If you have like a CDN that you want to use, that's great. But if you are using the way that I did with module path / IBM Cognos / JavaScript, that would be web content / JavaScript. It would need to be in every gateway. So now that we, yes,
Question back there.
go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Were you asking where the configuration?
So with the configuration, we can manually or dynamically set a minimum date and a maximum date. Let's say that we wanted to prevent users from selecting a date before January 1st, 2017. There are a few ways of doing that. Easiest way, 2017-01-01. Oh, my bad. It has to be in quotes. Now, if anyone selects before January 1st, 2017, it will fail. But we can also use a JavaScript library called Moment, which makes selecting dates very, very easy. So moment dot, I don't know, subtract one, what is it? Month. So we're using a third-party library called Moment.js, and we're telling it that we want to take today's date, go back 1 month. Run. Oh, and we can't set it to before July 9th because today is August 9th. So the same thing can be done with min date, max date, dynamic start date, and dynamic end date. How are we on time? We're fine on time. Let's go to the next workshop, using data sets. All right, as I said before, one of the most exciting things about the new JavaScript control is the fact that we can send data directly to the JavaScript control from Cognos. We don't have to load it and then scrape it using some method of hidden fields. So what can we do? We can create a new query. Let's go to sales, time, and we will take, I think it's date. We'll call minimum. And then sales, and let's filter on quantity greater than 0. The idea here is the time dimension has data from the beginning of the year, but we don't have sales until some other date. And we'll make sure this works. Any day now. There we go. January 12th, 2010. So we can go to the prompt page, click on custom control, and we have this add data set. Add the data set. It'll automatically create a new query. Let's just use the one that we created before. Go into data. Oh, sorry. Yeah, data, data items, and drag in date. And hopefully, that should set the start date. One thing. This won't work unless we change the name to minDate. Again, the control is expecting certain names, minDate, maxDate. Let's make sure this works. Run HTML. And we can remove this. Interesting thing to note. If you have minDate in the configuration and in the coming from the data set, it'll use the first one that it finds. Run HTML. All right, so let's change this to 2010. And yes, it cannot be set, a start date cannot be set before January 12th, 2010. Does anyone have any questions on anything that we've done so far? It's all nice and easy, very easy to understand.
What you're doing right now is limiting what they can change the prompt,
Exactly.
but it's not defaulting the prompt to.
That is exactly correct. And since you asked, we might as well do that now. If you saw before, there were 4 additional options it was expecting. MinDate, maxDate, dynamic MinDate, and dynamic maxDate. DYN start date. So let's try that. DYN start date. So now we're, instead of the MinDate, we're just passing the first date of sales as the dynamic start date. And if everything works, beautiful. We can add as many data sets as we want. So we can say that we're getting the minimum date from this one table, but we're setting the dynamic date from another table. Many, many different options here that we can go. Yeah. And we're actually doing really good on time. Workshop 3. What did I do in here? Now, the error notification that we're getting when someone tries to play around and select an invalid date range is a popover. But that might not always be the best way of presenting an error. We might want to notify the user some other way. So how can we do that? Well, in this case, very, very easily, we can drag in a block. This will be the container that holds the error message. And let's call this block name, just so we remember that we're calling the block name. And in the control, we can add, let's do max date, I don't know, 2018-01-01. And we have text note container, and that is block name, because it's the same name that we used in the block. So the control notices that we explicitly told it where to put the error notification. And when there is an error, for instance, we try to set this numlock after the max date, we get a very nice notification there that should fade out on its own, but that's not working for some reason. TextLate plugin must not be working correctly. I actually had things to ponder to pad out the time in case we were running ahead of schedule. We are. So things to think about. Is there any other way to indicate an invalid state? Is there any other... my demo originally had animated text in here, which is not working for some reason. So I'm going to have to look into that way. Should we give the developer a way to customize the error note message? And next, we can actually get into the JavaScript code itself. You know, the part that we were all waiting for, dry JavaScript code.
Paul, is everything you've done so far browser agnostic?
Absolutely. This should work in Chrome, Firefox, and Internet Explorer. I have not checked mobile browsers or tablet browsers, simply because I don't have this hooked up to my iPad. This does not work in active reports. It's something that I've brought up with IBM, and they said they are considering. But I don't know if these JavaScript controls will actually get into active reports at any point. But I have tested this. This uses jQuery as a base, and that's it will work in all the major browsers, and it will degrade nicely if it doesn't. Before we get into the JavaScript itself, any questions? Yeah.
Actually, I'm curious about, are these JavaScript modules provided with Cognos, or are these just custom developed?
These are custom developed. So you can build them in-house. You can download them from the PM Square website. But as they are in-house, you can modify them to meet your needs. And they're very, very easy to modify. Now,
Question.
yeah.
So if currently we have some things, pages written with JavaScript. Would that would probably port right in here? We could start.
Not exactly. This is where it gets hard. In Cognos Analytics, they're using what's called require.js, which loads the JavaScript in differently than we're used to in Cognos 10. The benefit of this is that it allows us to use conflicting libraries. So if you've ever tried to use jQuery in Cognos 10, you'll know that in some cases there are problems with that. I've had a lot of problems when I had a jQuery plugin that worked beautifully, and then I pulled in a tree prompt, and all of a sudden everything stopped working. Even with the jQuery no conflict mode set on, there are conflicts. The idea here is that everything is self-contained inside the control, and it's not reserving those global keywords. So you can have two functions that have the same name, and they'll both work at the same time. Okay, so that's actually, if you look in the control deep dive, let's open Notepad++, because I'm sure everyone wants to see blurry text on the screen. Where is it? Okay. Is that blurry enough? Nope, wrong one. Control plus, make it a little bit bigger. All right. Now, define tells the JavaScript parser that we are going to be using these modules. We can give them a name. So jQuery, when we want to reference anything from jQuery, we could use the $, or we could use whatever we write in here. Same thing with moment. The moment object will reference that based on this name. The main function is here. That's what's executed when we run the report. The validator is actually this is where Cognos will begin to initialize the prompt. It draws the control on the page, and then it will start working with it. So after the control is drawn, it'll use this. We have, for some reason, the lettering and text-to-late plugins were not working here. but the error message still popped up, which was nice. And we have a connection to Bootstrap, which was for the popover. The control host is the control itself. And the configuration is whatever we wrote in here. That is a JSON object that we can use. We can reference individual objects from inside the JSON, O, and then calling that individual parameter name. Here, if the user didn't give us a name, we'll assume that they're going to be using from prompt and from date and to date. But again, this will fail if the report developer doesn't give the controls names. It's up to the report developer to get this to work. Secondary run. In the case of setting the prompts based on the dynamic dates, we only want that to happen on the first run. Nothing is more annoying than selecting a date, hitting finish, and then it goes back to whatever it was before. So this is important. And the moment plugin takes whatever you have in there. It evals for the moment if you put in moment code directly. And this is where we start looking at the data sets. If there is a data set that's attached to the control, it finds it here. If it has data stores and the length is greater than 0, because if data stores don't exist, then you can't check its length, and that would fail. We loop through it, and then we're looking for specific names. Dynamic start date, dynamic end date. Once we have those, the reason I have substring in here is that timestamps will come with hours, minutes, milliseconds, which is not useful to anybody. If we have a date time prompt, we could set it up to use that, but I was too lazy to do that. Next, it checks, does the configuration. It checks if it's not the secondary run, and we have a dynamic start date set, then we set it. Interesting thing that I noticed in Cognos Analytics version 5. Setting the values using the prompt API doesn't actually set the value. So we have to call the onChange event. I have been assured by IBM this has been fixed in version 7. Promised. But so you know, in case it's not, and the prompt API doesn't actually call the onChange event for the control to remember the new prompt value, very easy to use. We can just call it. And then finally, it's now the secondary run. If the control runs again for whatever reason, it won't actually reset the prompts to a different date. You can call the same control multiple times. You can have, let's say, start and end date for shipping, start and end date for ordering. There are many reasons why you might have multiple date range prompts. So we only need the CSS once. So we check, does the CSS link exist on the page? If not, create it. If it does, skip it. And finally, we have the functions to set on the control itself, the validator. Is everyone familiar with the prompt API from Cognos 10? Excellent. I'm going to pretend you all said yes. So this looks for the prompt name from the configuration. If it found it, great, set it to that. If it didn't find it, assume that they're using from date. Same thing with that. Now it looks for the control, in this case the from prompt. Sets focus on that. From date, it will get the value from the prompt, convert that into a date. It gets the value from the to date, and sets that to a date, which we will use to compare later on. Is there a block element defined for the note? Great. Any errors will happen there. Now it does the basic comparisons. From date, is from date greater than to date? If it is, throw an error. If the text node is defined, then it'll put the error notification there. It'll animate it. In theory, I swear it worked when I was testing it before. If a text node is not defined, it'll create a pop-up. Code here checks if it's too far up, then it will do a pop under as opposed to a pop up. Simply, where does it place it? It'll automatically hide itself after 3 seconds. Then, if the from date is in a valid state compared to the to date, it will check the next thing. Min date, same idea. Is the from date before the min date? If it is, well, there's a problem. We have the same logic here for the other error. Start date cannot be set before. I personally prefer this format, but other people might want to see it written out nicely. And those were for the configuration. If we decided to set min date from the data set, that's what we do here. We check, is there a data set associated with the control? If there is, we start looping through that. There might be more than one. We get all of the data stores. We compare all of the column names. We're looking for min date. Once we find that, we check the value from the date against that. And if that fails, again, create the error message, either with the note or the popover. Interesting thing that I found here. If we were to set the value here, while the validator is still on that, the Cognos will check the new value while it's still checking the old value. And it will get into an infinite loop. And this had me pulling my hair out for a very long time. Here's the solution. We set the validator to an empty function. Then we set the new correct value. If the user selects a value before the min date, set the value to the min date. But we have to make sure to disable the validator before we do that. And then afterwards, we can set the validator again very easily. The same thing, same logic for the to prompt. Once the validators have been enabled on the prompts, we're done. Function done initializing, that's an internal Cognos API call. Tells it we're done. Continue. Now there are a few things to think about here. Is this the best way to show an error? Would we ever be in a place where a start date can be after a min date and after an end date? I can think of at least one case where we might have a start date happening, in theory, after the end date. Is this the best way to indicate an error? Do we want to prevent the user from selecting that date, or just put the control in an invalid state and turn off the run button? All right, any questions?
Paul, can we put this on GitHub?
I don't see why not. I can set up an account and put all the controls that I wrote for PMScore on there. Go ahead.
Just in general, because there's this new way of doing the JavaScript.
Yeah.
Put it in the library, it's got to be on the server.
Yeah.
And the old way where you HTML item,
Mm-hmm.
put JavaScript in there. And I don't recall if you said this, you probably did, but I missed it. Does the old way still work?
Not in interactive mode. All of the reports from Cognos 10 will still work only in non-interactive mode. In Cognos, in the report properties, you have run with full interactivity. If you have any embedded JavaScript from Cognos 10 you're migrating, this has to be set to no. By default, this will be on yes. And if you load a report from Clipboard, even if it's from Cognos 10, it will automatically set itself to yes. So it does make things more complicated. In general, you should be making controls as generic as possible. So let the developer set in the configuration all of the customizations he would need for the individual reports. You can't just put it in directly to the report anymore. Anything else? Go ahead.
One question.
Mhm.
If people have a bunch of reports that they maybe want to turn off the interactive mode,
Mhm.
you know, if maybe like Modio or there's another way to do those in bulk.
The run with full interactivity is not in the report specifications. I think it's a property of the report in Cognos. Modio CI has this really nice tool, Assertion Studio, that lets you check pretty much any property, either in the report specifications or on the report object from Cognos. I don't know the property itself or where it's stored, but I can imagine that it should be possible to batch set interactivity on or off.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a better question for the Modio presentation.
Yeah, put the Modio guys on the spot.
Thanks.
You could also just do a mass update to the content store. No, that's a joke. Sorry.
Isn't that deployment mass update? All right.
Sweat?
On importing content, yes. But when you manually open from Clipboard and then all of a sudden it doesn't work and you're getting crazy errors that are completely meaningless, it's usually because run with full interactivity is on. Yeah.
So just to give you guys an example of one way I could see this working in your Cognos Analytics environment. Paul makes this cool JavaScript control. We throw it on the PM Square Git, right?
Mm-hmm.
You pull it down. The way this works now is, you take that JavaScript, it's stored on your Cognos server, you're referencing it in the reports. It's not stored in the reports.
Exactly.
So Paul comes up with a better version of it. We put it up on the Git, you pull it down, and you only, you don't have to go in and adjust all your reports to put in the new JavaScript. You just maintain it on that server.
Yeah.
And that's something that I know there have been discussions internally like, well, could we just make a library of cool things and just make it available to our clients? And then we maintain it, and when
Exactly.
we mean Paul, and when Paul makes the new version, you just go pull the new version, and if you have 1,000 reports using it, it doesn't matter. You just replace the JavaScript on the server, and everything should run.
Yeah.
Is there a specific place on the server you need to save it?
It needs to be accessible from the user's browser. So web content / JavaScript will work. If you have a website and the website has files somewhere, you can put it there. It just needs to be accessible from the user's browser. We're good on time? 10 minutes? Excellent.
It's
It's-
not
It
today.
is actually.
Is it? On the website?
It's on the PM Square website. On the newsletter, I actually have a few controls that I've written, and all of them are available. At the bottom of the article, there's a download link. Download them. Again, very, very easy to configure specifically for your needs. I tried to make it as generic as possible, but you might want to let the report developer set the error message. Exercise for the student. How do you do that in the JavaScript? Oh, I'm a big fan of having the students do all the work.
Well, so we're sending out all the collateral presentations to attendees after, so you can expect an email with all the information on how to access this.
Yeah.
I mean, I think long term, if we as PM Square want to put these libraries out there, first of all, if we do finalize that decision, we'll let everybody know. And if we want to develop more, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, we'll probably maintain it all on GitHub.
Yeah.
You know, so we can be cool like the kids.
And I have been trying to go back over all of the solutions that have been released for previous versions of Cognos. There was a very popular one about expanding collapsing. For some reason, even with the interactive mode, they don't have expand and collapse. So I just wrote that. It's important to note that it's JavaScript in HTML items that don't work, not HTML items themselves. So everyone remembers the expand and collapse, where you have this put HTML items into the list and so on. So that one works great. Actually, there are actually two versions of that. If you have a crosstab where you have a single column where the hierarchy is delineated by padding, and there's another one with lists with row headers. This JavaScript control will work with both of those now. In this example, we have a crosstab where it's done by padding. So no padding here, 20 pixels, 40 pixels. It's actually looking for the expand span. When it finds that, it'll put the logic in there, loop through the next, all the rows below it, comparing the padding, and so on. And when we run that, it works beautifully, as we see here. The Datashark plugin is a little bit more on the complex side, but the fun thing about this is that it's using the datasets. Again, we're able to do pretty much anything that we want. Any JavaScript library, you can probably adapt that to work here. So in this example, I'm bypassing the native Cognos lists completely. I don't like them, we don't need them.
Could you show that again?
Absolutely. Run this. So,
Yeah, this is not a Cognos chart.
yeah.
Yeah, this is something we built. And there's a presentation
There's a
later today about it.
Yeah.
If you want to go more in depth about what this is, but
Yeah. And, you know, it's beautiful. You have filters on the top. You can sort it. You can even set it to have different pages instead of scrolling down here. And, you know, master detail on the graph. Very, very easy. Okay. I was actually afraid that with all the snafu with the, you know, Wi-Fi, we were going to run out of time, so I was rushing ahead. All right, so I have some challenges. How can we adapt this to use a single date prompt? Any ideas? Things to think about later on, because we don't have enough time to go over today. The big things are customizing the error message. I am not a designer. I would be very happy to say this is invalid and let the user figure it out. But there might be better ways of doing that. And we should let the report developer do that. Just to go back into here, the thing to note that the configuration is called o.property_name. So if we did want to let the user, the report developer, set their own error message, it would actually be very, very easy. The text here, no reason for that to be a string. O, start date error. And now, all of a sudden, it's looking for the value start date error from the configuration. From date, we go back to here, and in the control, here, start date error, you messed up. Very, very, this is the PM square, so you're not going to see it, unfortunately. Very, very easy way to change the way the JavaScript works. Everything here, all of the text can be set to be used the configuration, even down to, if you wanted to for some reason, the controls for the popover. I know the text animation wasn't working, but that can also be controlled from the popover, from the configuration. In this case, it was supposed to be syncing in, pulsing, and then fading out in sync. There's no reason for that not, and it would be very, very easy to set the effect through the configuration, in effect, and then here we would do numlock off and O out effect. Again, the configuration is set in the JavaScript and then called in Cognos. Unfortunately, in this version of analytics, the controls don't have a way of telling the report developer what options are available to him. I strongly recommend maintaining documentation and instructions for the report developers to use. When you drag in this control, here are the things that you can set. Here's what you can do. At the moment, it has to be maintained externally to Cognos, but hopefully that will change soon. All right, 3 minutes left, and I have nothing more to talk about, unfortunately. So,
out of curiosity,
Mhm.
if we did make, say, just some kind of generic libraries for stuff like
Mhm.
controls or things like that available, how many of you would be interested in actually going and downloading those and using them?
awesome.
How many of you would be allowed to? Okay, good. I mean, because there's a difference.
Yeah.
A lot of times, I
Yeah.
work with a lot of organizations where it's like, you're going to go download something from some vendor and install it on our Cognos server. Are you nuts? So if we want to make sure that both people want it and that
And can actually use
that
it.
they can actually use it. And if that's the case, then we'll probably go down that path of trying to find some.
Yeah.
I have a question. So once you download it and
Mhm.
the next version of Cognos upgrade comes through, is there
That-
going to be a problem?
That is a very valid concern. Part of the reason behind this is to make updating easier. Let's say version 7 comes out and the HTML changes completely. In theory, you would only need to update the JS file once, and all of the reports using it should keep working the same way. You won't have to go to each individual report. In cases where everything changes dramatically from Cognos 10 to Cognos 11, honestly, I don't know what will happen in those cases. I did not expect the JavaScript to change so drastically like this, but it happened from 8.2 to 8.3 to 8.4, same thing. So it can happen. I can't promise that everything will work 5 years down the line. But I do know that anything using the API itself will continue to work. This version, for instance, it's only using the API and third-party libraries to do pop-ups on the screen. I can't think of any reason why it would not work because it's not actually using any Cognos functionality that isn't documented. The only thing there is one thing, and that's calling the onChange event to actually get the prompt API to work the way it's supposed to. That's a bug on the Cognos side. Yeah, it won't work because IBM should fix that. But that's just easily removing those lines.
And another
Yeah.
thing would be like the way we set up the from date and to date. That's
Yeah.
not always the way the developer would code it.
Yeah.
So maybe something to think about in that area to see that how flexible we can make it.
Absolutely. There are date range prompts. You could very easily set this to use the date range. I don't remember off the top of my head how the prompt API works with the date range prompts, but not a problem. You can very, very easily set it to I think it's something like values dot start date or something like that. Value dot start and value dot end, and you can have multi-select date range prompts, in which case you'd be comparing all of the values coming in. Yes?
Just let you know, we
You probably got to go? All right. Yeah. Thank you very much for attending.